Hey, Bry Guy here, returning to you after a while. It's been a while since I looked into this, but I thought I might be able to help demystify what the specs of the Steam machine are, what we can expect. There's a lot of talk going around the internet about what the capabilities of this machine is, and we're going to find out together when it releases, but I might as well just try to give a little bit of insight into what this device is theoretically capable of. I haven't done this in a while, so I apologize if I stumble or if I misspeak. But anyways, let's get into it. So we have the Valve Steam Machine. We have a device with, it has storage, NVMe storage most likely. It has a 6-core, 12-thread, 4.8 gigahertz GPU, which is pretty robust for a console. I don't think we've seen this. The CPU in the PS5 is 8 cores, 16 threads, although more of it's used for the operating system. So it takes a core and a half for the operating system in the PS5. So it operates like a 6.5 core device as far as game developers are concerned. This will have an OS as well. I don't know how much resources the Steam OS takes, but the fact that it runs on a Steam Deck, which has only 4 cores, and it runs pretty lightweight on that, is a good sign that it won't require as much. 16 gigabytes of regular DDR5 SODIMM RAM. It has 8 gigabytes of GPU RAM, a GDDR6, and it has 28 compute units. So this tells us almost everything we need to know. We have 28 compute units at 2.45 gigahertz. And this is going to be useful for figuring out exactly what these systems are capable of. So let's pull this up right here, and let's pull our, where is it? Right here. Let's pull this up as well. So this is the PS5, which is the device everyone's trying to figure out. Is this more powerful than a PS5? Is it less powerful than a PS5? And that's what I'm going to try to tell you. So the PS5 is a RDNA 1.5 GPU based. It's got some features from RDNA 1 and some features from RDNA 2. It's capable of ray tracing. It is a little bit less robust in the ray tracing regard compared to our full RDNA 2 device. But it has 2,304 shaders, 144 texture mapping units, and 64 ROPs. And when we look at the Steam Machine GPU right here, it has 1792 shaders, 112 texture mapping units, and 64 ROPs. You can see right away it will have better ray tracing performance because it has essentially 56 ray tracing units compared to the 36 that we have here. So that's one thing that it'll be better at right away. It will be better at ray tracing than the PS5. Maybe not have the optimization some of the games have to make them run as well as they do with ray tracing on the PS5, but it will be better in terms of theoretical performance with the PS5 in that regard. Now, some important features. So people talk about the floating point operations of it. Now, the PS5 is based on RDNA 1.5, which means that it doesn't have the dual issue compute that we see in the RDNA 3 and after. And why that's important is when you look at the total floating point, the teraflops that it's capable of. It's saying here that the Steam Machine is capable of 17.56 teraflops, while the PS5 is capable of a grand total of 10.289 teraflops. So in paper, theoretically, this makes the Steam Machine seem like it's more powerful, even though it doesn't have as many shaders. And the reason for that is the dual instruction compute. So I can explain this to you real quick. On the PS5, the way you get your floating point operations is you multiply the amount of shaders by 2, because it does an instruction on both sides of the clock, and then you multiply that by the frequency, so 2233. And then we can see this exact number, 10.289 teraflops, 10.289 right there. That's how you get that. It does dual. If you cut your precision in half to floating point 16, which is essentially the quantity of decimal places goes down. Some things don't need as high precision, then you do get more compute out of the device. It doubles it essentially, because you can pair two instructions, two FP16 instructions to be calculated as one FP32 instruction. So that is where we get that number. Now, the reason this is confusing is because RDNA 3 introduced dual issue compute or something on that line. So if we multiply by 2 by the clock to 2450, this will give us, sorry, wrong one, times 2. Did I miss that part? Okay, I made a mistake. 1 second. So 1792 times 2 times 2450. There we go. So if you look, this only gives us 8.78, sorry, 8 teraflops. But it's when we multiply it by 2 using the dual issue nature of RDNA 3 and above that we get 17.56 teraflops of performance. So instead of multiplying your instructions by 2, like you traditionally did, you multiply it by 4 to get its theoretical floating point performance. Now, that's not the way it's going to perform. If you look at some device like, one second, if you look at the 7700 XT versus the 6700 XT, this is where you go from single compute, to dual issue compute on the 7700 XT, and it does not double the performance. And the 7700 XT is a bigger die, so it's a larger die. I think it's 2,000 some odd shaders versus 3,000 shaders. It's like 2,560 or something by 3,000. It's very close to that. So most of this is coming from the fact that it's a larger die, not because it has more compute. So if we take that into account and then we come back here, now we understand that comparatively in terms of the size, we're talking about divided by 2, we're talking about a 10 teraflop GPU in the, the PS5. So you have this 10 teraflop GPU, and theoretically, in terms of its comparison between the PS5, this acts more like an 8.7 teraflop GPU. It'll probably be more than that. Most of that compute makes a bigger difference not in games, but in workloads. So the more professional workloads you get, the more that compute's useful and the more that it operates that way. But when you're using it in games, you don't really see the compute in the same way. So we're really talking about, from an apples to apples comparison as close as we can, given the nature of the two architectures, something roughly around 8.7 teraflops of theoretical gaming performance, not compute performance, but gaming, versus a 10 teraflop machine. So it's roughly about 15% less powerful on the GPU compared to the raw power of the PS5. Now we can get an idea of how it's going to be in terms of fill rate and whatnot. So if we want to figure out the fill rate of the PS5, you simply multiply the amount of texture mapping units right here by the clock. It's not dual instruction. So you see here we have, I mistyped. So it's 144 times 2233. Here we go. So this is where you get this right here. This is its theoretical fill rate, how many pixels it can put on the screen. Right, so the pixels are texels. That's textures. How many textures it can wrap around objects. So this is where you get the 321, 522. Now we can now figure out from this what would compare on this. So we have 112 units now clocked at 2450, which means that this number here is actually 274,000. So it's also about 20 to 30, looks like, I don't know what's the difference between that. You have somewhere between a 15 and 20% difference between that in that regard. And then it's probably going to be the exact same. So we have 64 here, 64 here. So actually, in terms of ROPS, this should be almost the exact same number. So we'll have 64 times 2450, and that will give us this third number here, which is roughly the same. So that's going to be our how many pixels it can render, and that will affect essentially how quickly it can fill the resolution of 4K. So it's roughly similar in terms of drawing the pixels onto the screen. That part of the pipeline is not going to be slower between the two devices. It should be roughly identical, but the Steam machine is actually going to be faster at that because it has. So that's the one advantage it has, is because they have the same number of ROPS as each other. That means that the Steam machine will have 156,800 theoretical pixels it can draw, its fill rate, whereas the PS5 only has 142. So it'll be a little bit faster at filling pixels to use resolution. Okay, when it comes to the performance, it's basically, I'm expecting something that will roughly be equivalent to a PS5 in terms of the GPU. There's a few neat features the PS5 has that this doesn't have. So the PS5 has a a special ASIC chip on the block that compresses, decompresses textures on the fly into, so it pulls from main memory into the pulls from main memory straight into the CPU GPU, the compression decompression engine, and then it stores it in the shared memory, and then either the GPU or the CPU can talk to it. Whereas on a PC or on the Steam machine, you have system memory and you have video memory. And when you have that configuration, what happens? You have storage copies it to system memory decompresses it back to the system memory moves the decompressed version over to the GPU. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I think it's 5 copies to the one. So PS5 doesn't have to do that step. So all of those copies causes instructions on the CPU to call for the copies to happen. And it also, so it takes some performance off of your CPU. And this is an advantage the PS5 has over it. And it's hard to quantify without benchmarks of this. This is actually probably going to be the first device that can tell us that. Because if we have a game that's really well optimized for PS5 and then we run it, we can see what the differences are. But the big issue is that the Steam Machine's CPU, 6 cores at 4.8 gigahertz, is much faster than what the PS5 CPU is. So the PS5 CPU doesn't need it to be as fast, although the PS5 CPU has a lot of trouble. If you look at Devil May Cry 4, if you look at a lot of games, it very rarely gets up to 120 FPS. So despite the fact that it has this help in terms of it has the decompression compression engine, and it also has the Tempest engine to take care of all of audio processing, which computers don't have assistance with in the same way. So that's two things it has taken off its plate. It still has trouble reaching very high frame rates. I think this device, in games where you can compromise the graphic settings, you'll be able to get higher frame rates out of this device by compromising settings. On the PS5, there's no point in compromising the settings anymore because it seems CPU limited, stopping it from ever reaching 120 hertz in most games, other than indie games. So it has more trouble hitting 120 hertz than this machine will. And there'll be a lot of cases where this device runs games at maybe slightly lower visual quality than the PS5, but hits significantly higher frame rates. I wouldn't be surprised to see this hit 144 to 165 hertz in some games fairly easily. It's not going to be Alan Wake 2, it's not going to be Black Myth Wukong, but it might be in several other games. So that's my expectations for this particular device in that regard. Now, one problem this is going to have, in theory, that the PS5 does not have. If you look at a game like Silent Hill F, it has traversal stutter on PC really badly. So traversal stutter is because of the 5 copies. When you have 5 copies of transferring data, and that 5 copies, if you look up the GDC talk that talked about direct storage, it directly refers to exactly what happens in the essentially the passing of data from CPU to GPU and how many copies happens compared to console. But in Silent Hill F, you get traversal stutters. Traversal stutters are essentially when you're moving through a game quickly and it needs to load in more area or enemies or things like that. So it starts that process. And on PS5, it does that one process through decompression engine into shared memory. And on PC, it does the 5 copies over from decompressing, moving the assets, and so on and so forth. So that's why those hitches are so much worse on PC with Silent Hill F than they are on the PS5. You can get much higher general performance on PC, but we're having a very, very hard time in terms of traversal stutter and frame hitching. Now, I don't know the solution to this, and I don't know if Valve has any way to cut down the quantity of copies. It could be interesting if they do, but this is an area of deficiency between the PS5 and the Steam machine and all PCs, to be honest, and the PS5. It's one particular advantage that it has. So in general, and the other aspect of that, is that is on the ASIC. The stress of it's on the ASIC, so it doesn't interrupt the CPU's performance on the PS5. And you can see this really clearly in a game like Dragon's Dogma. I know, I can't remember who it was, but a very, not Digital Foundry, but another one like that, did exactly that. They compared the PS5 version of Dragon's Dogma 2 to the PC version, and the CPU performance was much better on the PS5 than was expected compared to relative CPUs because it has help in terms of compression decompression. Whereas in the PC version, you're always going to have the CPU being asked to decompress assets while you're playing. So anyways, if we break it down now, looking at this, talking about what it's capable of, we're looking at something that's probably somewhere between 15-20% less powerful of a GPU, but has some modern features. So let's say 10% less powerful, but it does have modern features, and it will be able to hit higher frame rates. The PS5 has a really, really hard time ever hitting 120 frames per second in any game. Whereas there will be some quantity of settings you can do in Fortnite in this game, or Apex Legends, or Marvel Rivals, games like that, that you will be able to hit higher frame rates on these devices. Where this device will really sing is lighter weight games. Like, you could easily play mouth washing on this at 120 frames per second on an LG C2, or 144 frames per second on a newer OLED display. You'll be able to hit the higher frame rates for more moderate games. This will be a great repo device if you want to play repo, or if you want to play something like that. Something like Arc Raiders is going to be a bit heavier, so unless you're willing to compromise the settings on that, you're not likely to fill up the entire frame rate you're hoping to. It's much more of a 1080p, 1440p device as far as I'm concerned, and I would say even more 1080p device. Those other games I listed, mouthwashing, repo, things like that, it's going to have no problems hitting 1440p or 4K. But other games, more graphically intensive games, will not. You're not going to be hitting those resolutions in games like Alan Wake, or Black Myth, or so on and so forth. Some games are going to be too heavy for it. So that's kind of my expectations for this device. It's going to be a fun piece of kit. It's going to be a great piece of kit for hitting high frame rates in moderate games. Counter-Strike, Rainbow Six, Apex, PUBG, all of those things are pretty old now. And really anything 3 or 4 years old and earlier will run really well. Now, in terms of memory, it's not going to be hitting the highest graphics settings. So Ultra, I would say, is off the table for any game that came out in the last 3 years that's pushing visuals in any way. So, but if you put it the higher medium and then lower your texture limit, it will be okay for now. I don't think it's enough memory personally, but given the current memory scenario, we have to be happy to compromise one way or another. Now, Valve has an advantage here in the sense that it has it has part of the driver converting the APIs. So on PC, if you play a game in DirectX 11 or DirectX 9 or DirectX 12 or Vulkan, right, it will have different instruction sets. But the way that Proton works on SteamOS is it converts everything into Vulkan. And that gives it some opportunity to potentially do some texture caching or some other things. I don't really know. Valve would have to tell me, but it could have some really interesting ways to run more hardware. Run a little bit leaner on its memory profile. Maybe they have a way to get it down so that it's less of an issue. But it is one area where it's weaker. It has more total memory than the PS5, but it has less graphics memory than the PS5. Now, there are games on the PS5 that use, because it has 16 gigabytes of memory, I believe, on the PS5. It should tell me right here. Let's see. Pretty positive it is. Just want to make sure. I'm going to just Google it. PS5 total memory. Not storage. RAM. Okay, what do we got? 16 gigs. So it does have 16 gigs. So where the Steam Machine does have, it has 16 gigs for the, where is it? Saw before 16 gigs for the CPU, and then it has an additional 8 gigs for the CPU, but it's doing a heck of a lot more copies between the CPU and GPU memory with that compression decompression, so it needs more memory on the CPU compared to that. And the PS5, you end up with scenarios where you have less you have games that can use 1 gig on the CPU and use 15 gigs on the GPU, and you have games that can use 5, or you have games that can use 8 gigs on the CPU of system memory and then use 8 more gigs on the GPU. So it depends on the game whether or not you will use all of the memory, and not all games even use all the memory. So it's hard to know how much memory and whether this will be a problem. It's also like one of the reasons Valve can do its shader caching is because the hardware is set and because it forces the API. So because it forces everything into Vulkan, it has more awareness of what is going on with shader caches, and essentially it can pass shader caches from devices. And the fact that it's currently on Steam Deck exclusively means that if the second one person has done their shader caching on the Steam Deck, it can take the shader cache that it now sees through its Vulkan layer, and it can distribute that among everyone else that have played that game before they even boot the game, so that they don't have to cache the shaders themselves. Because shader caching is an expensive process that before a game boots on the CPU. So it just ignores that step by passing the cache to other devices, and it works really well with the Steam Deck. Now, it will be able to do something like that with the RDNA GPUs because it's the same driver and it's going to be similar hardware. So anyways, all that to say, it needs more memory than the PS5. It has more memory because it has 16 plus 8 gigabytes. But because it has to copy more times than the PS5, it will act like like less memory than the PS5 comparably. So we have a device that I'm going to say is roughly a PS5, maybe a little bit less powerful than it, but it's going to do a lot better in the lighter weight games. And it's going to do a little worse in the heavier games. Hopefully that answers some people's questions here. I'm curious about SteamOS. I have a 7950X3D CPU and a 9070 GPU in one of my computers. I could try installing SteamOS on that device. If that's something you're interested in, feel free to let me know. But hopefully this was insightful. If you have any questions about this, I apologize if I misspoke anywhere along the way or if I got anything wrong. But thanks for listening, and hopefully that helps. And if not, I'm sorry. If it did, great. Feel free to put questions in the comments below. Always be kind, and have a great night.